An ordinary mail train which for 125 years was following the usual daily route from Glasgow to London was stopped deep in the night, August 8, 1963 at 3:15, by a sudden signal of traffic lights. The first to jump out of the head carriage was the assistant driver, who decided to check what was wrong. Several men in military uniforms and balaclavas approached the train. Thus began one of the major robberies in the history of the 20th century. It took the criminals only 30 minutes to seize more than $70 million. Let's go back 1 year to see how they did it. 1962. Two gentlemen, Gordon Goody and Buster Edwards, had the idea to inquire about the transportation of money by special mail trains. They found a man who leaked them information about the schedule, order, volumes of sending from Scotland to London money bills, which were already being withdrawn from circulation due to the fact that they were falling into disrepair. What was important to the robbers? Small denomination bills, £1-5 at the most. That is, it was impossible to write down all the numbers of these bills and then trace them through the large banks, as is often done after major robberies. In England of those years, there were special mail trains, which consisted of 7 to 8 cars. These trains functioned according to a very well thought-out, efficient system. The mail was loaded, and while it was moving about 12 hours to London, a large number of postal employees, 72 people in our case, were sorting it on the move. So by the time the train arrived in London, all the mail was sorted, and periodically, about once a week, a special purpose carriage was attached to this special mail train, in which money was transported. Money was always transported in quite a large amount. The usual portion was about 300,000 old pounds. But this time the amount was very large, about 2.5 million old pounds. As for the guards, they simply weren't there. By that time, they had already started to replace the old collection wagons with new ones, where the locking system was more functional. But in our case, because there was a shortage of such cars, an old car was taken from the reserve, which, in general, did not have any security measures. The two gentlemen were further joined by several other comrades, notably Charlie Wilson, Roy James, and a key figure in the whole story, Bruce Reynolds. Altogether, they called themselves the Southwest Gang. However, being gentlemen, the robbers were well aware that they lacked professionalism, as each of them had a history of mostly petty robberies and home invasions. So trains weren't their specialty. And then Bruce Reynolds, who is often called the think tank of the whole operation, took the initiative to invite specially trained people to the team. Negotiations began with another gang, South Coast Raiders, specializing in railroad raids. Accordingly, gentlemen Tommy Wisby, Bob Welch, and Jim Hussey joined the group, along with a visiting expert in railroad signaling, Roger Cordry. Preparations for the operation and information gathering began. On August 8, 1963, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, the raid was made. The train had left Glasgow the previous day. Taking its time, making stops, unloading and receiving mail, it followed its usual route. On the approach to the place where the robbery was planned, the raiders pulled up a large army truck and 2 Land Rover cars, in which they intended to leave. As for the railroad signal system, a rather unsophisticated but effective operation was done to it. The green signal, when needed, was simply covered by the robbers with a black dense bag that kept out the light and turned on a prearranged bulb on the red signal of the traffic light. Machinist Jack G. Mills, upon seeing the red signal, naturally stopped. Not understanding what was the matter, he sent his assistant to the line telephone to clarify the situation. The telephone line was not working. The wires had been cut in advance by the intruders. Several members of the gang attacked Whitby and tied him up. The train driver, meanwhile, was waiting for his assistant to return when the robbers surrounded his cab from both sides. The 58-year-old man tried to fight back and push one of the intruders off the train's footplate, but was attacked from behind and struck on the head with a heavy metal object. The raiders had planned to incapacitate the main driver from the very beginning. Therefore, they needed a man who was ready to perform this simple, but still not an ordinary operation of driving away. The robbers attracted a certain man who used to drive trains but had already retired. However, on the spot, at the very moment when it was necessary to act, it suddenly turned out that he had never dealt with this particular model of train, a relatively new one. Well, what could be done in such a situation? The only thing the robbers did was to bring the battered driver to his senses. In addition to the driver and his assistant, the train was carrying 72 postal workers, but none of them were concerned about the sudden unplanned stop. The perpetrators unhitched the main and second cars and moved them to another track, stopping at the Bridego Bridge, a mile from where the train had originally stopped. It was the second carriage that the criminals were interested in. It contained sacks of dilapidated bills, which were being taken from Glasgow to London. In the capital they were to be utilized, but before that, rewritten. Banknotes with denominations from £1 to £5 were placed in 128 bags. Several letter carriers were in the carriage with the money. They were quickly tied up. The bandits removed 120 bags, leaving 8 bags, and put them in a nearby parked van with a driver before leaving in 2 Land Rover Jeeps. The van and cars were driven to the group's headquarters, which was located 30 miles from the robbery site. After reaching the place, began to count the loot. It turned out to steal a little more than £2.6 million, about $50 million in today's equivalent. It is assumed that the gang members were only 18 people, but several identities have not yet been established. The main participants got a bigger bounty. Those who were assigned minor roles were rewarded accordingly. And everything could have gone well for the robbers without one caveat that gave the police a clue. It was that when the bandits left the scene of the crime, they told the frightened people to lie still for half an hour. The police decided that this was not a figure of speech, but a deliberate instruction. Given that witnesses had seen the robbers leaving the scene in Land Rovers, after estimating the approximate distance that could be covered in 30 minutes, it was decided to comb the entire 30-mile area. The burglars therefore decided to leave the farm earlier than planned, and before doing so, to destroy all prints. Whoever was assigned this job did it very badly. When the detectives got to the already abandoned shelter of the bandits, they found a board game, and on it, the prints of almost all the robbers. Some of them were already listed in the police card catalog, and therefore it was not difficult to establish the identity. It was more difficult to catch the criminals, but then the search was joined by citizens of the United Kingdom. For information about the bandits offered a substantial sum. By early 1964, most of the dashing gang was arrested. Brain of the operation is considered to be Bruce Reynolds. Immediately after sharing the loot, he flew with his family to Mexico, where he spent his share, and in 1968 returned to Britain to participate in a new case, but was arrested and sent to prison for 25 years, of which, however, served only 10. Reynolds's right-hand man in this robbery was Douglas Goody, who later wrote a book outlining his version of events. Goody called himself a born thief, and did not want another career from a very young age. It was he who found the mysterious postal worker who gave out all the information necessary for the robbery. Goody was caught in early October 1963. He served 12 years of his nearly 30-year sentence. The most cunning member of the gang is considered to be Ronnie Biggs, who spent 15 months in prison and then managed to escape. In 1965, he changed his appearance, obtained false documents and flew first to Paris, then to Australia, and then, when his extradition was demanded by Interpol, to Brazil. Biggs returned to the UK in 2001, making a show of his homecoming and pre-selling the story to the Sun newspaper, but was captured and sent back to prison to serve out the rest of his 30-year sentence. He was released on health grounds in 2009 and died 4 years later. Other members of the gang received various sentences, but none of them served more than 13 years. The train robbery was the biggest news story not only of the year, but perhaps of the decade. The scope and prowess of the scam brought the criminals popular acclaim, which probably would have been even warmer had it not been for the mangled train driver Mills. Much of the stolen money was spent or hidden by the robbers. The police never recovered it,